The idea for Hannah's List actually came at a dinner I was having with a friend. She was telling me about a friend of hers who had died several years earlier, and before she died, she had written her husband a letter, and in the letter she said, "We've been married all these years. You're not going to do well as a single man. I want you to remarry without guilt, and I want you to remarry right." And so she gave him a list of 3 friends she thought would make him a good wife, and he married the first one on the list. And I loved the premise so much that I just kind of took it and made it my own. In the book Hannah's List, I've created the hero, and when I say I try to be creative, and I've never done this before, I did first-person male point of view. The opening line of the book is, "I'm not a sentimental kind of guy." And he is a doctor, a pediatrician, and his wife dies of ovarian cancer. He's 35 and grieving terribly. He receives a letter from Hannah given to him by her brother. And in the letter she says, "My life is ending, but yours is going on." And she gives him 3 names, and of the 3 names, and I chose these very carefully, it starts off with Winter Adams, who is a character related to the Blossom Street series. And let me see, she is she owns the cafe, and he's very familiar with her. So it's a comfortable, he knows her already. And so I could just see Hannah's thinking here to introduce him to these women. Now, the next person is Leanne Lancaster. She was Hannah's oncology nurse. So he knew her peripherally. He saw her, he may even engaged in conversation with her, but he didn't really know her. And then the last person is Macy Roth, who he'd never met. And so I can see Hannah's progression there of how she brought these women into his life. And Macy is a wonderful character. I have met women like her. She's rather, if we would describe her, we would say a scatterbrain. She can't hold one job. She has like 5. And she's always going from one thing to another. And her mother named her Macy because she went into labor in Macy's. And Macy's just grateful her mother didn't go into labor at Neiman Marcus. But she's a wonderful character. All of them come with their own story. And each one is a compelling character in her own way. I don't think there are any real surprises for my readers in Hannah's List, but I try to be creative with every book that I write. When I get a premise, I have 4 words that I gauge the premise by. I want it to be compelling. I want it to be provocative because I want my reader to think. I want it to be relevant, and at the same time, I want it to be an entertaining story. And if I can do that with a premise, then I develop the plot. Like many people who have a dream, I'd always wanted to be a writer. When I was a kid, every time I would think about writing stories, when you're in pain, you throb with pain, but I throbbed with joy. Except I kept stuffing that dream into the future, which is so easy for so many of us to do. But there came a time when I had a cousin who died of leukemia, and it just seemed that I couldn't put this dream off any longer. So we rented a manual typewriter. We couldn't afford the price of an electric one. So the rented typewriter went on the kitchen table. I moved it at meal times. The older 2 kids would go off to school, and super moms turned into that struggling young writer. I definitely write on a computer now, and it's ruined my handwriting because the brain will go as fast as your fingers go. So if I write it by hand, it just takes much longer. I am a dyslexic, and you don't ever get over being dyslexic. You just learn to compensate in one way or another. And with me, I found that because I am dyslexic, God compensated with me in giving me a very creative imagination. And many writers are actually dyslexic. Everything I write has to be proofread 3 and 4 times by other people because I don't see the errors. And that's just the way I work. I don't really have any quirky habits or rituals when it comes to writing. I had so many interruptions when the kids were little that I'm used to them. It doesn't bother me at all. I get right back into the story. I do plot the book all the way through. I don't like a bunch of surprises. I don't like having to figure something out in the middle of a book. So for me, it just works best if I develop the entire plot, every scene of the book before I sit down to write it. And then that works both because I sell on that. I give that to my editor and we make adjustments. And then when I sit down to write the book, I'll sit down and I'll say, okay, today I am writing this scene, and it's right there in a paragraph form. With a long history as a writer, almost 30 years now as a published author, my writing style and skills have evolved. In the beginning, I was writing category romances, but as I've matured as a woman, it's harder to write about a 25-year-old falling in love. And so as I've matured, so have my heroines and the stories, although I try to always bring in all generations so that the books have mass appeal. Knitting actually saved me as a child because I didn't learn how to read until the 5th grade. I was always at the very bottom of my class. I was the only first grader in the sparrow reading group. Not a bluebird, not a robin, but the sparrow. And when I got into about 10 years old, I don't know why, but I wanted to learn how to knit. My mother didn't know how, so she brought me down to a yarn store, and the ladies there taught me. And it actually changed the whole course of my life because I was dealing with a lot of frustration, being at the bottom of my class, being an object of teasing because I couldn't read, that I had an identity, and it gave me self-esteem and a feeling of accomplishment. It actually helped with my reading skills and mathematics skills. So I really do think knitting saved me as a child. Reader feedback is absolutely essential to me. Readers and what they have written to me in letters and on the guest book entries and my website have changed the course of my career 4 or 5 different times. A good example is the Cedar Cove Cookbook and the Cedar Cove series itself. Anytime I would mention a recipe or something that one of the characters was making or cooking in the Cedar Cove series, the office would be inundated with letters and requests for that recipe. And so I took that to my publisher, and they listened, and we created the Cedar Cove Cookbook, which is a phenomenal book. I mean, it's just the best cookbook. Really down-to-earth, fun recipes. The macaroni and cheese, Terry Polgar's macaroni and cheese recipe alone is worth the price of the book. Then the Cedar Cove series. I did a number of series, 6 books set in Alaska, 6 books set in Texas, 4 books in North Dakota, and every day, even now, almost 20 years after those books were published, I get letters. What about this character? What about that character? And I thought, get smart, listen to the readers, and have an ongoing series. So I don't know how many books there will be in the Cedar Cove series. When asked that question, I usually say until all the stories are told. I do have a dead author wall, and these are author signatures that I have collected over the years. The first one I got was Catherine Marshall, who wrote the book Christie, which I absolutely loved. I've collected Mark Twain, Ernest Hemingway. I think I have like 50 now of all these signatures, Charles Dickens. And these are my mentors and my heroes, C.S. Lewis. These are the people who I aspire to be one day, that someone would want to collect my signature and put it on a wall, that I've inspired somebody else and gave them a love of words and a love of story, and how important story is in our culture. So it may be a dead author wall, but they're alive in my heart. I want my readers from Hannah's List in every book that I write to come away with a feeling of hope and joyful feeling, a good feeling. And when I do autographings, I often hear that. I love your books because they inspire me. They make me think, and that's exactly what I want for my reader. I want to be a value-added author, to give them more than just a good story, but a plan, an idea. Just recently I was at an autographing, and a woman came to me with a book that she had written. It was literally a book. And she is a teacher, and it's a creative writing class. And my book, 20 Wishes, inspired her students to create wishes of their own. And each one of them put down a wish for me. And they put it inside this book. And it's a beautiful book that I will treasure. And it came from just having written a book called 20 Wishes.